All right, so in this video, I'm going to be doing a little bit of ricing on FreeCAD to try to make the UI just feel a little bit better. And this is where I've reached with the conclusion, and so I'll show you how I got here. So just to kind of point it out, if you'll notice, I have a very open viewport now, and all the icons are a little bit bigger, more spaced out. The line weights and the visibility of the part in the middle of the screen are much better. And if I click into a sketch, I've also got really clear, easy to see lines with easy to read fonts. And so these are all the things I'm going to just point out. Hey, here's how you change them to get things into a much more usable form. And I do think that in this condition, I'm going to try to use FreeCAD quite a bit more because the usability has gotten to a point where I think maybe it's worth it. Now, I don't want to take credit for all of this. There was a user that left a comment on my last video on FreeCAD mentioning some of the OpenTheme stuff that's available. I also found a video by a channel called Delta Hedra that went into even more kind of UI tweaks that can help the way the visual appearance kind of comes across. And then there's a few things that I found myself, and I even mentioned some of that in the last video about how things get highlighted whenever you select them to make them a little bit more visible. Now, to start off, I'm going to nuke my setup, and I'm going to go and revert back to bare bones. What does FreeCAD look like whenever you open it up out of the box? And you'll see quite a big visual difference. So here's how, if you ever do want to just go back to scratch on your FreeCAD install UI, go up to Edit, Preferences, and then do a Reset All. And this won't actually take care of everything. It does reset a lot of the theme and the layout, but not everything. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to close everything out. Okay, so in order to finish fleshing out the config, I've gone and I'm in my home directory, and again, I'm on Fedora Linux, so install places may be a little different. Now, I've got FreeCAD, I believe, through a Flatpak, so I need to find and delete the configuration files to make sure that nothing gets retained whenever I next open FreeCAD. So on my installation, it's going to be, again, in the home directory in .var, and then I'm going to go into App, and here I'll find the FreeCAD folder. Then I'm going to go into Config and then FreeCAD. And so here I'm going to get rid of all these files. So I'm just going to select them all and delete. Now I actually found there was another config file here. If I went into Data and then FreeCAD and into the Save Preference Packs, it had some backup configs here. So I also had to delete that too. So again, just to make sure that I've got everything reset here. So now we're just going to reopen FreeCAD. And on a fresh install, FreeCAD kind of looks like this. Now I'm going to go with FreeCAD Lite because I do prefer Lite whenever I'm doing CAD work. All right. Navigation style, I'm going to change to Blender. All right, so this is kind of the from scratch default. This is what things kind of look like. So what do we want to tweak? So one of the problems is visibility, the way things get selected. So there's a lot of colors we might want to change. The way things get highlighted. And you can see there's just a lot of kind of aliasing and jankiness, and so that's some of the stuff we want to get rid of. The user menus up here and the toolbars, there's just kind of stuff all over the place. I've got multiple bars, even though I've got plenty of space up here. The icons are kind of small. All right, so what are we going to change? So the first thing out of the gate is to set and use OpenTheme. Now, this is an add-on, so we're going to go to Tools, Add-on Manager, and continue. And so this is Add-on Manager. This is where you can add a lot of stuff to FreeCAD. And one of the things you want to look for is a thing called OpenTheme. So you type in OpenTheme, and here it is. If I make this window a little bigger, see the OpenTheme pack. Now, I've already got this installed. So this is one of the things we want to implement. So if we go back into Preferences, and here we can change our theme from FreeCAD Lite to Open Light. Now you can do Open Dark as well if you want. I'm also going to make my toolbar icons bigger, so you can do large or extra large. Let's see what extra large kind of looks like. Then we hit Apply, and this is going to take a second because it's going to shift a bunch of stuff whenever it moves over to the new theme. So there it's taken. Now there's also the open preferences. This is separate from the open theme. So if I pull this over, you'll see if I click apply, it will apply the other preferences. I didn't like that, so I did not apply the open preferences. It's going to change quite a bit more as far as the way your tools are ordered and organized and how you flip between different workbenches and stuff, but that's all I'm going to do here. The next thing I want to change is the selection colors. So if I get out of here, this is, you can see whenever I select something, it's this blue color. That to me doesn't stand out very well. All right, so I'm going to go into preferences and then I'm going to change in selection the colors. So the pre-select is whenever you mouse over something, what color is it? I'm going to pick an orange, but I'm going to change this to 177 and I'm going to change the value to 177. So that gives me a dark orange if I mouse over something. So if I hit apply and hit OK, you can see that orange whenever I mouse around. But now if I click on something, it's still blue. And so you can leave that if you want. I tend to like a similar color. So I'm going to go back up in here in preferences. I'm going to change that to the bright orange. And again, with a 177 green value, but now the 255 lightness value there, hit apply. And now you can see whenever I click something, it's a bright orange, and I think it stands out pretty well from the background. Now, the other setting that I modify in this little selection menu is the pick radius, which is how far away will it snap to something to select it. So I'm going to increase that a little bit out to 20 pixels. And so this is, again, if you get your mouse close, you don't have to click right on something. So if I want a line, you'll see it'll snap over even though I'm not exactly touching it. And you can make that bigger or smaller with that pick radius. And that does, to me, make it a little easier to pick stuff, right, and click on things. All right, so the next thing I'm going to deal with is, again, the aliasing. So if I go up into Edit and Preferences, and now I'm going to go into Display. And on the 3D view, let's make sure that we've got high anti-aliasing here. And I'm going to change this marker size. So marker size is kind of weird. I think it's just odd that it's in this place in the preferences. So if you mouse over it, it says, look, this is the size of the vertexes in the sketcher. So before I change it, I'll show you what this thing is. So let me hit apply. And if I go into model and I pull up a sketch, so it's these dots, right? These little points, those are the vertexes that this thing is going to change. So if I go back up into preferences and I make this, I'm going to make it like 13 and hit apply, you can see now those dots are much bigger. So why I think that's weird is because there is a section in preferences for Sketcher settings, but I guess since this affects more than just Sketcher, it affects TechDraw and some other stuff, they put it here. But yeah, that's how you control the size of those dots if you ever needed to find it. And I do like them bigger because I need to really be able to see where those dots are. So next up in UI, make sure that your style sheets are set to whatever OpenTheme. It should be automatic, but there you go. The icon size, this will change your tree. I'm not going to change anything here. On navigation, I've already changed it to Blender. I'm going to change the rotation mode. So what is this going to change? Let me close out of this sketch. So on this object, if you click to rotate on the object, it will rotate around where you click. But if you click off the object to rotate, it will rotate around where you click, which can make it really wonky, I find, because like if I click over here and I want to rotate, you can see I can rotate stuff around a lot. Now, some people may like that. I don't. I'm going to change that to rotate at the object center. Now, what does this do? Well, it's still, if I click on it, it will rotate wherever I click if I click on the object. But if I click off the object, it will default to the center of the object. And so that way I can rotate around, but it won't rotate around where I click. And I prefer that setting. It just makes it a little bit easier because I don't have to go back and click on the object center or anything. I can just click anywhere and I can just start rotating as I want. Okay, the next section we are going to modify is in the colors. So under display colors, this is where you can adjust the background. So the OpenTheme light changes it to this light gray, and if you use the dark, it's like a much darker gray background. You can change this if you want. I like to collapse the gray value so it's a little bit more uniform. So I'm going to have a little bit of a gradient, but not a lot. So I'm going to take this value down to about 240 at the high end, and at the dark end, I'm going to raise it to 220. And so it's not going to do much. It's very, very subtle, but I've got a very slight amount of radial kind of gradient there, but not a lot. And I like this gray because it really means that both dark and light colors show up pretty good against the background. And so there you go, right? You can set it to whatever you want. You can set a uniform color, but that's how you set the color of the background. And I do like kind of a high value gray because, again, to me, that lets both light things and dark things show up well. All right, next up on the part design stuff. So back into preferences, down here under part design, under shape appearance. So this is how you can change the weight of the lines in the 3D view. And so that is line width and vertex size. So I'm going to set the line width up to 7. I'm going to set the vertex size up to 9. In this section, it won't let you go above 9. And I don't know why, because if you edit the thing directly, you can. And I would actually prefer for the dots to be a little bit bigger, but that's what it is. The other thing about the UI in FreeCAD is that whenever you mouse over a vertex in like Fusion 360, it will pop up and be bigger whenever you mouse over something before you select it, whereas in FreeCAD, it doesn't. And what this kind of means is, if I go ahead and apply this and hit OK, like when you mouse over this edge, it doesn't get thicker, it just changes colors, but it remains kind of hard to see because it's so skinny. In Fusion, if you mouse over that, it will actually thicken the edge as it gets highlighted, and so it really stands out and makes it easy to see what you've selected. Now the vertexes are going to be these little points, and this model is built with the default settings, so you can see how small the markers are. So that's what I've just changed. Now, if I make a new model, it will apply the new settings. Let me plop down a new sketch. And so you can see how much thicker the lines are. And again, if I flip back and forth between these two, again, I prefer the more cartoonish, sharp black edges here. Now, you can also change the color of the edges or whatever, but the fact that they're thicker means whenever I mouse over them, they stand out much better whenever I've selected an edge. And you can see, maybe, depending on how big of a screen you're looking at this, the vertexes also are much bigger. Now, the thing is, these things don't change size whenever you zoom in and out, so they're constant. You know, again, whether or not you like that, it does mean that if you're using a really complicated part, that the thick lines may clutter up the image. Let me load up a really complex part and you'll see what I mean. So here I've opened up a PCB prototype that I've been designing, and this is a step model of the PCB that I can use for other stuff. But you can see, yeah, it doesn't look great because I've made the lines so thick and heavy, and I've made the vertexes so large. But, you know, that is something to keep in mind. There are trade-offs with your UI, right? It may be better for some things than others. The UI I'm setting up, I mostly do like one-off parts where there's not a ton of stuff going on. And so the heavier lines are good there. If you're dealing with super complex assemblies, well, you might want to change that. Now, the thing is with this PCB is this is spat out from KiCad, so I actually can go up here and change the draw style to shaded, and all of a sudden it looks great because it was already kind of output in a finished state. You know, this is kind of one of those models that if I really wanted to view it, I might not use that kind of line drawing view. I might use this more shaded view because, yeah, it looks a lot better in that sense. Now, another thing I usually do is I turn down the shape shininess a little bit. And this kind of changes how it gets shaded as you rotate it in different kind of appearances. So we're going to move on to Sketcher. So under Sketcher, I like the Fusion 360 kind of viewport. I really like the way it looks. So that has a grid. So I'm going to turn on the grid. I'm going to make the grid spacing 5 millimeters, and I'm going to make a major grid every 5 lines. And so I'm going to hit apply, hit OK. Now, if I go back into a sketch and turn the grid on, this is what it looks like, right? So I've got this grid, and the grid is going to be a 5 millimeter grid. And again, every 5 units, you can see a major line draw. Now, you can change all the settings on the line weights and stuff if you want, but again, I like this type of viewport. The next thing I'm going to change is I'm going to go into display and I'm going to increase the font size. Now, this, again, there's different levels. I'm going to go up to, I think 24 might work okay. So I'm going to hit apply. What this is going to do is this is going to change how big the fonts and your constraints and stuff are when you're doing a sketch. And the default, like if I go back to the default of 14 and I open up a sketch, that's these letters, right? This 110 millimeters, and it doesn't scale. Again, when you zoom in, it stays the same size in your screen, and it's kind of small on my screen because I got a 4K display here. So if I go back up there and go to preferences and I change that and I go up to 24 pixels and hit apply, you'll see how much bigger, and it's just easier for me to see. They just stand out a little bit better. So I do like the larger constraints, and it kind of draws everything just a little larger, and on my screen that shows up better. The other thing is the lines are very, very thin. So if I, again, go into preferences, go into appearance now, this is how you can change the sketcher line widths. So on the geometry, I'm going to go up to 8, and on everything else, I'm going to go to 5 because I want my main geometry to be big, and then any other either reference or construction geometry, I want it to be a little less heavy. And the last thing is, since I'm using orange for selection, I don't want to use orange for invalid sketch. I'm going to make that like a bright teal, again, just so it shows up. And then I'm also on the fully constrained sketch. I'm going to make this a little darker green. So then I'm going to hit apply, hit OK. Again, some of this stuff, by the way, it won't show up on existing sketches. So if I go out and then open it again, you'll see that it now has updated. And now you can see, again, I think stuff just shows up a little bit better. So again, if I mouse over and then I've got my bright highlighting for the orange, the green here shows that it's fully constrained. And again, I just think this looks better than the default. Now, the last piece of this is whenever you start doing a new part, the panels on the left over here, right, where it shows you the model, it shows you your tasks. This is where we really start customizing the viewport itself, right? So there are a few things to do here. So number one, these panels. I'm going to take the task panel, and you can break this out so that it floats, and then grab it and just drag it over to the other side. Okay. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make these things transparent because this is, again, more how Fusion 360 looks, and I am trying to get back to more of that visual appearance. So I'm going to toggle the overlay, and here it's still a little shaded. Let me load up a model real quick. So here we've got a model, and you can see when I mouse over, it gives that background and it blocks some of my model, and so that's overlay mode. However, once you're in overlay mode, it gives you this little eyeball, and if you click that, now all of a sudden it's fully transparent. And you can do that over here on tasks as well, so that now if I move this thing around, you'll see that you can see the part behind the panels, right? And that really opens up the viewport quite a bit, and it gives you a lot more visibility. Now I'm also going to get rid of my Python console because I don't really need that. Now I've got this really big wide open viewport where I can really see everything. Now here's just a brief mention. A lot of the line weight stuff I mentioned, it doesn't just automatically update, and any part that you've built with the line weight settings for the solid models will retain those line weightings on the model itself. So like this is the part that I built in the last video, which was this GoPro mount, right? And its line weights are set based on the line weights that were default. They didn't update just because I changed my preferences. If I want to change the line weights, I have to go to the body, and then down here I can change it in the properties on the model itself. So I can change this to like 7 and change the point size to 9. And this then, it will be kind of what new models will look like. But again, just something to note that not everything takes right away. But now I've got this big open viewport. And the last thing is to rearrange all the tools, right? So there's a lot of stuff I just don't use up here on the toolbar. And so I'm just going to start getting rid of it. So if you left click on a toolbar, you can start removing stuff. So like, I don't really need the help. And so this starts freeing up space, right? So now I can take this and move it up here. So get rid of views. Right now I've just got one bar And if I do the same thing like in a sketch menu, I can also do that here. And so like once you've got all this set up, right now I've got a fairly clean little toolbar. And actually I can collapse a lot of this stuff even more by putting that right there. And now I've just got one toolbar on my sketcher. If I close, I've got one toolbar for my part design. I still got the search bar, get rid of the search bar. And so that's how I get back to a pretty decent, wide open, clean UI with big buttons that I can see very clearly. It's just, to me, a lot more useful way to set up the UI, and it makes it a lot more user-friendly. But knowing that these things are available is really important. Now, from here on, it's up to you. Again, there's a lot of choices here. How do you want your stuff to look? And I will give FreeCAD a lot of credit that it is very customizable. You can do a lot with the interface to make it look like what you want to look like. So I feel like with FreeCAD in this state, I could maybe end up using this, and I'm gonna try that. I'm gonna try to use it more and more and try to wean myself off of Fusion, because there's a lot of downsides of Fusion. I don't like the fact that it's so cloud-based. I don't like that Autodesk can just push stuff on you and change the rules over time. I don't like that your files have to be stored on their servers. So maybe I can work with this enough, learn FreeCAD enough that it can get me through on the things that I need to do with CAD modeling. But if you got any feedback, suggestions, things I missed, other tweaks that you like to use, feel free to leave them in a comment down below. And as always, I appreciate your time. Thanks.